Justin W. stuck by him. He wrote him long, encouraging letters, chatted with the warden, brought him books, and when Neal came out, Justin gave him one more chance, but Neal fouled up again. Whenever any of his pool hall buddies developed a hatred for a local prowl car cop, they went to Neal to do their revenge. He stole the prowl car and wrecked it, or otherwise damaged it. Soon he was back in reform school, and Brierly washed his hands of him. They became, in fact, tremendous, ironical enemies. In the past winter in New York, Neal had tried one last crack for Brierly's influence. Allen Ginsberg wrote several poems. Neal signed his name to them, and they were mailed to Brierly. Taking his annual trip to New York, Brierly faced all of us one evening in Livingston Lobby on the Columbia campus. There was Neal, Allen, myself, and Ed White and Hal Chase. Said Brierly, "These are very interesting poems you sent me, Neal. May I say that I was surprised?" "Ah, well," said Neal, "I've been studying, you know." "And who is this young gentleman here in the glasses?" inquired Brierly. Allen Ginsberg stepped up and announced himself. "Ah," said Brierly, "this is most interesting. I understand that you are an excellent poet." "Why? Have you read any of my things?" "Oh," said Brierly, probably. And Ed White, whose love of subtlety later drove him mad over Boswell's old Sam Johnson, twinkle-eyed all over, he gripped me in the arm and whispered, "You think he doesn't know?" I guessed he did. That was Neal and Brierly's last stand together. Now Neal was back in Denver with his demon poet. Brierly raised an ironical eyebrow and avoided them. Hal Chase avoided them on secret principles of his own. Ed White believed they were out for no good. They were underground monsters of that season in Denver, together with the pool hall gang, and symbolizing this most beautifully, Allen had a basement apartment on Grant Street, and we all met there many a night that went to dawn. Allen, Neal, myself, Jim Holmes, Al Hinkle, and Bill Thompson. More of these others later. My first afternoon in Denver, I slept in Hal Chase's room while his mother went on with her housework downstairs and Hal worked at the museum. It was a hot, high plains afternoon in July. I would not have slept in if it hadn't been for Hal Chase's father's invention. Hal Chase's father was a mad, self-styled inventor. He was old, in his 70s, and seemingly feeble, thin, and drawn out, and telling stories with a slow relish. Good stories, too. About his boyhood out on the Kansas plains in the 80s, when for diversion he rode ponies bareback and chased over coyotes with a club, later became a country school teacher in West Kansas, and finally a businessman of many devices in Denver. He still had his old office over the garage in a barn down the street. The roll-top desk was still there. Together with countless dusty papers of past excitement and money-making, he invented a special air conditioner of his own. He put an ordinary fan in a window frame, but somehow conducted cool water through coils in front of the whirring blades. The result was perfect within 4 feet of the fan, and then the water apparently turned into hot steam in the hot day, and the downstairs part of the house was just as hot as usual. But I was sleeping right under the fan on Hal's bed with his big bust of Goethe staring at me, and I comfortably went to sleep, only to wake up in 5 minutes, freezing to death. I put a blanket on and I was still cold. Finally, it was so cold I couldn't sleep and I went downstairs. The old man asked me how his invention worked and I said, "It worked damn good." And I meant it within bounds. I liked the man. He was lean with memories. "I once made a spot remover that has since been copied by big firms in the East. I've been trying to collect on that for some years now. If only I had enough money to raise a decent lawyer." But it was too late to raise a decent lawyer, and he sat in his house dejectedly. This was the home of Hal Chase. In the evening, we had a wonderful dinner. His mother cooked venison steak that Hal's brother had shot in the mountains. Ginger was staying at Hal's. She looked fetching. But there were other things troubling me as the sun went down. Where was Neal? As darkness came, Hal drove me into the mysterious night of Denver, and then it all started. The following 10 days were, as W.C. Fields would say, fraught with eminent peril and mad. I moved in with Alan Temko in the really swank apartment that belonged to Ed W.'s folks. We each had a bedroom, food in the icebox, kitchenette, and a huge living room where Temko sat in his silk dressing gown, idly composing his latest Hemingwayan short story. A colic, red-faced, pudgy hater of everything who could turn on the warmest and most charming smile in the world when real life confronted him sweetly in the night. He sat like that at his desk, and I jumped around only in my chino pants over the thick, soft rug. He'd just written a story about a guy who comes to Denver for the first time. His name is Phil. His traveling companion is a mysterious and quiet fellow named Sam. Phil goes out to dig Denver and gets all hung up with arty types. He comes back to the hotel room. Lugubriously, he says, "Sam, they're here too." And Sam is just looking out the window sadly. "Yes, Sam, I know. Yes," says Sam, "I know." And the point was that Sam didn't have to go and look to know this. The arty types were all over America, sucking up its blood. Temko and I were great pals. He thought I was the farthest thing from an arty type. Temko liked good wines, just like Hemingway. He reminisced about his recent trip to France. "Ah, Jack, if you could sit with me in the Basque Country with a cool bottle of Pont de Neuf, then you'd know there are other things besides boxcars." I know that. It's just that I love boxcars, and I love to read the names on them, like Missouri Pacific, Great Northern, Rock Island Line. By gad, Temko, if I could tell you everything that happened to me hitching there. The Burfords lived a few blocks away. This was a delightful family. A youngish mother, part owner of a useless gold mine with 2 sons and 4 daughters. The wild son was Bob Burford, Ed White's boyhood buddy. Bob came roaring in to get me, and we took each other right away. We went off and drank in the Colfax bars. Bob's chief sister was a beautiful blonde called Beverly. Tennis-playing, surf-riding doll of the West. She was Ed White's girl. And Temko, who was only passing through Denver and doing so in real style in the apartment, was going out with Ed White's sister Jean for the summer. I was the only guy without a girl. I asked everybody, "Where's Neal?" They made smiling, negative answers. Then finally it happened. The phone rang. And who should be on the phone but Allen Ginsberg? He gave me the address of his basement apartment. I said, "What are you doing in Denver? I mean, what are you doing? Like, what's going on?" Oh, wait till I tell you." And I rushed over to meet him. He was working in May's department store nights. Crazy Bob Burford called him up from a bar getting janitors to run after Allen with a story that somebody had died. And Allen immediately thought it was me that had died. And Burford said over the phone, "Jack's in Denver," and gave him my address and phone. "After you, I thought Burroughs had died," said Allen. And we met and clasped hands. "And where's Neal?" "Neal is in Denver, let me tell you." And he told me that Neal was making love to 2 separate girls at the same time. They being Luann, his first wife, who waited for him in a hotel room, and Carolyn, a new girl who was waiting for him in a hotel room. Between the 2 of them, he rushes to me for our own unfinished business. And what business is that?" I asked, all ears. "Neal and I are embarked on a tremendous season together. We're trying to communicate with absolute honesty and absolute completeness everything on our minds. Sometimes we stay up 2 days, getting down to the bottom of our minds. We've had to take Benny. We sit on the bed, cross-legged, facing each other. I finally taught Neal that he can do anything he wants. Become mayor of Denver, marry a millionairess, or become the greatest poet since Rimbaud. But he keeps rushing out to see midget auto races. I go with him. He jumps and yells excitedly, 'You know, Jack, Neal is really hung up on things like that,' Ginsberg said. In his soul, and thought about this. We got silent, as we always do after talking everything over. "What's the schedule?" I said. There was always a schedule in Neal's life, and it was growing more complicated every year. The schedule is this. I came off work a half hour ago. In that time, Neal is screwing Luann at the hotel and gives me time to change and dress. At 1 sharp, he rushes from Luann to Carolyn. Of course, neither one of them knows what's going on, and screws her once, giving me time to arrive at 1:30. Then he comes out with me. First he has to beg with Carolyn, who's already started hating me, and we come here to talk till 6 in the morning. We usually spend more time than that, but it's getting awfully complicated, and he's pressed for time. Then at 6 he goes back to Luann, and he's going to spend all day tomorrow running around to get the necessary papers for their divorce. Luann's all for it, but she insists on screwing in the interim. She says she loves his big cock. So does Carolyn. So do I. I nodded, as I always do. Then he told me how Neal had met Carolyn. Bill Thompson, the pool hall boy, had found her in a bar and took her to a hotel, pride taking over his sense. He invited the whole gang to come up and see her. Everybody sat around talking with Carolyn. Neal did nothing but look out the window. Then, when everybody left, Neal merely looked at Carolyn, pointed at his wrist, made the sign 4, meaning he'd be back at 4, and went out. At 3, the door was locked to Bill Thompson. At 4, it was open to Neal. I wanted to rush out and see what the madman was doing about all this. Also, he had promised to fix me up. He knew all the girls in Denver. "If you want girls, just come to me. That Neal's a pool hall pimp," said Bob Burford. "Yes, but he's a terrific guy." "Terrific? He's just small time. I can show you some real wild guys. Did you ever hear of Kavanaugh? He can lick any guy in Denver." But that wasn't the point. I rushed out with Alan to find the point. We went through the rickety streets by Welton and 17th in the odorous Denver night. The air was soft, the stars so fine, the promise of every cobbled alley so great that I thought I was in a dream.